Thank you, thank you. All right, good luck to me. Guys, thanks for being here. Thanks for making the trip to New Orleans. That's great, yeah. So, raise your hand if you live nearby. If you're just driving in, excellent, very nice. Raise your hand if you came from more than 3 hours away. All right, most okay. Raise your hand if you came from half the country away. Thank you for coming to be here. I think we all know why we come to New Orleans, to make bad decisions and learn from them. I got off the plane last night and Chuck picked me up and took me to dinner, and right there on the front of the menu was the oyster shooter. And I said, "Is that a thing that people eat?" And the waiter said, "Yes, it is." And I said, "Well, I need to have that." And Chuck was like, "Wow, you're wasting no time making bad decisions." So an oyster shooter, for those who don't know, it's a shot glass, and it's vodka and cocktail sauce, and an oyster, a whole oyster in the glass. And so you take it and you shoot it. It's a bad decision right away. And I had lunch with one of our speakers today, so Dr. McNamara, and now she has fully informed me of how bad a decision this was from a parasite standpoint. And I am completely convinced that I'm going to die. Our first speaker is amazing. You are going to love her. Don't take her to sushi. And don't let her around you when you eat oysters, because you won't enjoy them. But we're all here to learn. I was in the vet clinic, and this lady is in, and she's got her Pomeranian. And I said, "What are you doing for fleas and ticks?" And she said, "Tea tree oil." And I said, "Is that thing?" And she said, "Oh, yeah. It's antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral, and anti-parasitic. It cures acne, headaches, rashes, and head lice." And I said, "My neck has been really hurting. Maybe I should get some." She goes, "Oh, no, you need CBD oil for that." So Chuck called me. He was like, "Hey, I was wondering if you could come and do this thing for Stephen." I said, "Are you selling tea tree oil?" And he said, "Not yet." Tune in for 2020's American Heartworm Society when Siva rolls out their tea tree oil supplements. I said, "Where is it?" And he said, "New Orleans." I said, "Of course it is. Because mosquitoes kill dogs. In New Orleans, they just carry them away." We are going to get started with Dr. McNamara. So Dr. McNamara is a pathologist. She is a professor at Western University's College of Veterinary Medicine. She has an incredible TED Talk. You should see it. She was involved in the discovery of West Nile virus. She's going to be talking a little bit about that tonight as she talks about her own involvement in mosquito-borne illnesses and One Health. Guys, please help me welcome Dr. Tracey McNamara.
So just a disclaimer, I'm here as an individual and I'm not representing my employers. Your life can change in a heartbeat. 1 minute, I was working as head of pathology at the Bronx Zoo, giving baby bottles to snow leopard cubs and lion cubs, and I mean, it was absolutely amazing. I was living my dream. And the very next minute, I'm exchanging business cards with an FBI agent, and he hands me his card, and it says, "Special Agent, WMD." I'm like, what's the FBI doing with white muscle disease? And to a pathologist, that's what those initials stand for. And he goes, "No, weapons of mass destruction." I'm like, "Oh, get out of town, are you kidding me?" And he said, no, he was very serious. This is back in '99, people weren't talking about that stuff. Then I went to another meeting, and a complete stranger came up to me and said, "Dr. McNamara, it's an honor to meet you. I know all about you. You are a legend in the defense and intelligence communities. We call you the lone wolf." I said, "Oh, I like that. I'm going to put that on my business cards." And I just assumed it was at an agro-terrorism meeting. I just assumed it was USDA, FDA goes, no. He handed me his card. He was with the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and then he said, and I've read your file. Yeah, surreal. This all happened as a result of my involvement in the discovery of the West Nile virus in 1999, and it was a virus that had never before been seen in the Western Hemisphere. And what the public doesn't realize is they're talking to me because it was 10 days before we knew whether it was a naturally occurring strain of West Nile or whether it had been weaponized, and they want, were we under attack? So I got thrown into the world of biodefense, and it changed my life. Now, the interesting thing is, how did this all come about? Well, as a veterinarian, we are all trained to look at disease across species, but that was even more true in a zoo setting. There are only 7 zoos in the United States that have full-time, veterinary pathologists on staff. As a result, back in that time, we knew very little about a lot of our captive endangered species, so I had to rule out everything we knew about domestic animals, but had to be prepared for what if it's something new? So I always just ask that question, what if it's something new? I called it the Zen of zoo pathology, and I trained my students to challenge their perceptions and not to make assumptions. Now, in human medicine, they train medical students, when you hear hoofbeats in the distance, think horses, not zebras. Fortunately for us, a veterinarian did think zebras, and because I'd taken that approach every single day of my career, we were well suited when West Nile popped up. Louis Pasteur said, "Fortune favors the prepared mind," and that was absolutely true with West Nile. Now, what happened? Crows had been dying since the beginning of June. It was in the newspapers. The public was screaming for a diagnosis. But we have no wildlife disease surveillance to speak of in the United States because it's not funded, and it was misdiagnosed for 2.5 months. When neurologic crows started dropping into the grounds of the Bronx Zoo, I was worried about them introducing disease to our captive collection. So I paid attention. When New York City announced that people were dying of an unusual form of encephalitis, I immediately thought, encephalitic birds, encephalitic people, in the same place? The temporal and spatial relationships were too striking to ignore, and I wondered if there could be a connection. I called it 2 calls. CDC announced that the people were dying of St. Louis encephalitis. I'm like, well, that's interesting because St. Louis doesn't kill birds, and I've got barrels of dead flamingos. But I called up the USDA and told them, look, this is something new. I know you need to rule out Newcastle influenza and Eastern equine encephalitis, but I will eat my veterinary license if it's any of those 3. This is something new. I need you to take these samples as soon as you get them, put them on cell culture, and do EM. If these are 40 nanometer diameter viral particles, it is a flavivirus, and no flavivirus has ever been known to cause disease in birds. St. Louis is a flavivirus, and if we can establish that connection, it makes a stronger, possibility that these 2 disease outbreaks are linked. They did a great job. I called the CDC and told the guy, I think there's a link between the human deaths and the bird deaths, and asked him to test my samples, and I was summarily dismissed. They refused to test my samples, and I said, well, wait a minute. One of my colleagues accidentally suffered a needle stick exposure this morning. He has 3 kids. Whatever this is, he's been inoculated, and I've seen what it does to a brain on histopath. What do I say to him? And there was a pause, and the guy said, no treatment, no cure, say a prayer, hope for the best, click. Yes, defenders of public health. This went on for 3 weeks. Every time I called back, I was rebuffed. And finally, I had 2 more human exposures. Everything in the zoo was dying. And I was going crazy. I was like, okay, it is a flavivirus. I need BL3 containment. I need a place with every reagent to every dangerous virus known to man, and a place with a can-do attitude. And I was like, I'll call the Army. And I did. I picked up the phone and called Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland, the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute in Infectious Diseases that I knew about because I'm a veterinary pathologist. And they do all the work with these, BL4 pathogens. Asked to speak to the head of virology, said, it's new, it's the same thing killing people, and CDC is refusing my samples. Send us those samples tonight on dry ice. 48 hours later, he tells the CDC, she's not crazy, she's right. And West Nile virus is announced. And that's when everything went nuts in New York City. And this, if any of you have ever seen the movie Apocalypse Now, you'll know that, you remember that scene, Robert Duvall saying, I love the smell of napalm in the morning, smells like victory. And this is Rudy Giuliani, who was mayor at the time, saying, I love the smell of malathion in the morning. And but the public didn't. And imagine New Yorkers with the helicopters spraying pesticides. I mean, it was like, wah! Everybody was going crazy. Then on ProMed Mail, somebody posts an announcement that in Connecticut, they're finding dead cows by the side of the road. And we're like, oh my God, it's killing cows. It was a typo. They meant crows. They had left the R. Personally, I would not have minded a few dead cows because it would have brought the entire wealth and power of the USDA to bear on what was largely a wildlife Armageddon. But yeah, and then, there were all sorts of, in the hysteria, all these funny, cartoons, Gary Larson, pull out, Bertha, you've hit an artery. And there were some great t-shirts out there. Remember the Got Milk campaign, where the milk mustache? My favorite t-shirt was of a mosquito with a blood mustache saying, got blood? Anyway, the bottom line is, we were caught completely unprepared. Our government had no idea how to deal with a disease that crossed species lines. And our agencies were incapable of working together. They were divided into silos. And it unfortunately resulted in a significant delay in diagnosis, 3 weeks, of what turned out to be a very serious public health threat. Not a great showing. If it was a Broadway show, they would have closed on day one. So CDC had to change their, publicly issued diagnosis of St. Louis encephalitis and admit that it was, a brand new virus. And the really frightening thing and what made it so difficult to deal with was we had no idea what it would do. How do you communicate that risk to the public when you don't know what you're dealing with? We had no idea what would happen. I was never so proud, and they had to admit that they had suffered from tunnel vision, and that they too had to wake up to the threat of zoonotic diseases and realize that maybe veterinarians had something to contribute to the conversation. Because the bottom line is, it took it wasn't just a question of being in the right place at the right time. It was that there was a veterinarian with the right training to be able to see the forest for the trees. And I tell my students, never underestimate the value of a veterinary education, because it really is an extraordinary platform for dealing with emerging infectious disease threats. Anyway, in the 20 years since West Nile virus, we have continued to be taken by surprise by novel pandemic threats. And they say the lessons of West Nile virus. I'm like, I guess we're sort of all in remedial education, because actually nothing has really changed, except that there's been a great deal of talk about the need for change. And West Nile virus actually served as the launch pad for the One Health movement. that was, it was just a common sense. If you're dealing with diseases that cross the species lines, you can't just talk to physicians. You have to speak with veterinarians and with the environmental sector, with wildlife biologists, with entomologists. You have to take a holistic approach to emerging threats. And so the bottom line is we do need to do this, or it'll be to our detriment. We face a common enemy. Humans and companion animals are threatened by mosquito-borne diseases in human health. Mosquitoes have accounted for at least half of all the human mortalities that have ever taken place, the majority of which have been due to malaria. And unfortunately, it's not going to get any better. Whatever you may think, who you think who is responsible for, the facts are it is getting hotter. And when you're talking about vector-borne diseases, that's not good news. Mosquitoes are going to be expanding their geographic ranges and behaving in ways we may not be able to anticipate. In Germany, this was the hottest summer in Europe in the past 500 years. It was so hot they had to shut down the Autobahn because it was melting, it was buckling. They couldn't have road traffic. And so, the ocean is getting hotter, and we can predict Vibrio outbreaks because of the increased surface temperature of the ocean. So it's very real, and so much so, this isn't just me saying this. The World Health Organization in January 2018 took the unprecedented stance of when they issued their list of diseases of greatest concern, they added a new one, Disease X, meaning it'll be something we don't expect, it'll pop up out of nowhere, and we will be utterly unprepared to deal with it, and it will kill millions. I'm like, ooh, okay, that ain't great. And so the question is, are we prepared? We've had 20 years to pick up the slack and find a way to address these pandemic threats. And as far as vector-borne diseases are concerned, the answer is no, we are utterly unprepared. Entomology has not been funded. It's sort of a dying expertise. Mosquito abatement programs are chronically underfunded. So, you get what you pay for. I don't know why people are surprised when we have these outbreaks. And what's really scary is, as veterinarians, all these well-meaning rescue groups that are bringing in dogs from Korean meat markets, all those health certificates are fake. And they're under the wire. There's no legislation to address this. And so we are importing so-called foreign animal diseases wholesale, everywhere. I went down into my clinic last week, and there was a guy with a little dog, and I was like, oh, he's cute, what's his name? He's like, I don't have one for him yet, I just got him, he was from a Korean meat market. And I was like, would you please share that bit of history with the clinician who does his physical exam, because it's open season, anything is possible, that's how we got that new strain of canine distemper in Canada. We're getting leishmaniasis, rabies, you name it. We're being assaulted by these foreign diseases that are no longer foreign. And it's not just from people bringing them in, but you have natural disasters. We're right here in New Orleans. Well, when Katrina hit, the American Heartworm Society, with all those dogs that were translocated to different parts of the United States, at least 60% of them were positive for heartworm. So we now have heartworm in states that were never endemic, but we introduced it to the states. So well-meaning but misguided wholesale movement of pathogens. And, You know, the Companion Animal Parasite Council, it has those maps where every 30 days they can predict, or they issue predictions for, you know, where heartworm will be in any given month and how it's spreading. And they want to expand it to 3 other diseases. So, you know, it's very, very real. And as practitioners, I think at least a lot of my friends just sort of, you know, they roll their eyes when I talk about pandemic threats, emerging infectious diseases, and like, you've been to too many Department of Defense meetings, you know, you're off in la la land. I'm like, really? Do you know that the first veterinarian to ever handle a West Nile positive crow was a poodle practitioner in Queens? I guarantee you, he didn't walk into work that day thinking, I'm going to handle the index case of a virulent, brand new, never seen in this ecosystem pathogen that's going to cause significant human morbidity and mortality. You know, those days of thinking, it's just over there, are gone. We're dealing with globalization, we're dealing with travel, we're dealing with tourism. It's that mindset. Everybody needs to think like a zoo pathologist. Literally. Just ask yourself, just don't assume. Just don't assume it's not going to be anything. You know, anything new. It very well could be. So we have to be sure we don't suffer from the same myopia that the CDC did in 1999. We're as guilty of it as they were. So we cannot bury our heads in the sand. We as a veterinary profession have to step up to the plate and make sure that we are educating our clients and ourselves about what needs to be done against vector-borne diseases. So, public health has actually been dealing with vector-borne diseases for much longer than we have. So what can we learn from how they have approached dealing with malaria? So what do malaria and heartworm have in common? Well, they're both devastating diseases. Heartworm, they estimate, 1 million dogs have heartworm, and it's expanding its geographic range. And in one of those monthly maps, it showed that areas that were never endemic, like Illinois, Indiana, are now heartworm positive. So again, just because you've never had it in your practice doesn't mean you're not going to. Humans, devastating disease, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. 219 million cases in 2017, more than 400,000 deaths, and of those, the majority are children under 5 years of age dying from cerebral malaria. Devastating disease. And so there's been tremendous interest in malaria, and how do we address it? Both heartworm and malaria, we're experiencing resistance, where we have resistant mosquitoes. Back in the old days, to control malaria, they used DDT before they knew how damaging it was for the environment, but it worked, and they used a lot of it in sub-Saharan Africa, and it controlled the disease. But in the process of using so much of it, they also created mosquito DDT resistance in the mosquitoes. So even if they could still use it, it wouldn't work. And we now have chloroquine resistance, which is what they always used to treat malaria, all over the place, all over Africa. The difference is, I think they have an easier, they face less of a challenge than we do, because there are only a handful of mosquitoes that actually transmit malaria, whereas with heartworm, there are many competent mosquito vectors involved, all of which have different behaviors. So it can be tough to target how do we get rid of this? And that has driven people to look for other ways that we can deal with mosquitoes. And so Bill Gates, who has already put $2.9 billion into eradicating malaria, they have knocked it down by 40%, but they're still losing the battle, and they're looking for other ways to approach this global health problem. And they've always tried to use source reduction. At the turn of the century, in the Panama Canal in 1912, they would spray the water surface with kerosene because the larvae can't deal with it. And it's low tech. It works in some places, but they're looking at much more high-tech technology these days. And that includes creating a vaccine that will protect the mosquito, not the people, the mosquito, from the malaria pathogen. And he is spending $107.6 million on that effort. And the other approach is gene drive, to genetically modify mosquitoes. But, it may work, it probably would work, but is it going to be acceptable to the public? And many people think the answer is going to be no. They don't even like genetically modified crops. When you start talking about eradicating mosquitoes and taking them out of the ecosystem, people are worried about opening Pandora's box. Do we really know what will happen? So there's been a lot of opposition to this, genetic modification of mosquitoes, and people are saying, should we do that? Do we have the right to do that? Personally, yeah, if it's Aedes albopictus, yeah, I don't care. I don't think they have any legal right to exist. They cause too many fatalities, and there are so many species out there. Mother Nature is pretty resilient, I think. The mosquito populations are going to find a way to survive, unfortunately. Everybody always says the cockroaches are going to inherit the earth. Forget that. It's the mosquito. And but there is a lot of opposition to this. So people are saying in Australia, they've said, well, okay, why don't we take an approach that's a little less threatening, a little less sci-fi? And they are actually giving people mosquito boxes of mosquitoes infected with Wolbachia, which then renders them, the Aedes aegypti does not harbor the Wolbachia bacteria. So they actually infect them, and they've done trials in 3 states in the US, and it dropped the Aedes albopictus population by 70%. So they're predicting in 5 years this will be widely applied. So, but the Wolbachia, okay. But the biggest thing that they've always done for malaria, and the big difference between what they do in public health and what we've always done, is they try to prevent the bite in the first place. And that's the major driver of that program. We only treat dogs after they've already been bitten by the mosquito and been infected with diarrhea. We've just dealt with the pathogen, not with the vector. And in human health, for malaria, they have spent, in 2004, they delivered 5.6 million pyrethrin-impregnated mosquito nets, and then between 2008 and 2010, 294 mosquito nets were handed out throughout Africa. And it's low tech. And now the problem has been, people don't necessarily use it, or they wash them and it loses its efficacy, and so it needs to be retreated. So right now there's a lot of work on how can we just make something so simple be embraced and actually work. It's very low tech. And the biggest thing is you just want to prevent the bite in the first place. And when you do this, you decrease, even if one family uses it, then you're saving a whole community by decreasing the number of malaria-positive individuals that mosquitoes can feed on. Same thing applies to heartworm. You get that sort of safer community if this family, this family, this family have their dog protected from heartworm. There's going to be less spread of heartworm throughout that city. So these things, basically, like I said, you just want to keep the mosquitoes from getting to you in the first place, but we've never done that. So it's sort of like, well, duh, what's wrong with vet med? Why haven't we thought about doing this? Now, not to say it wouldn't be a challenge. We can't put dogs and cats under mosquito netting, or can we? Now here's a business proposition for you. Can't you see it now? Petco, PetSmart selling stylish mosquito gear for dogs and cats. They are making those onesies for post-operative care now to get away from the Elizabethan collars. But no, seriously, that's not going to happen. So we do have to think about, if we can't use mosquito nets, what can we do? And that's why we need to start doing what public health does, and we need to take that multimodal approach. We need to give mosquitoes the boot. We need to give them a kick in the butt and start addressing the vector and not just the disease. Not to stop the preventative. This is just one more step in our arsenal of weapons against mosquito-borne diseases. Because trust me, it's not just heartworm. Who knows what we'll be dealing with tomorrow? Anyone who says you don't have to worry about it is uninformed. We all have to worry about this. And you have to make sure your clients buy into this. It's the only way to go. So, because the next emerging infectious disease could be a lot closer than you think. And, we veterinarians, like I said, we're the ones who understand zoonotic threats. We're the ones who can do the best job, really, of educating the public about zoonotic threats in an informed manner. Not telling them, oh, get rid of your cat because you'll get toxoplasmosis, So those were my points. I really, I didn't even get into all the work that's been done to weaponize mosquito-borne viruses. Yeah, trust me, I worked in the former Soviet Union. We're talking pure evil in terms of work that's gone into using mosquitoes as a delivery vehicle for weaponized encephalitic viruses. It's very serious for us and for the animals we take care of. And I always tell the people in DC who ignore companion animals, I was like, you want a worst case scenario from a bioterrorist event? Put it into a dog or a cat in a shelter. People sleep with their dogs and cats. Make it something that's transmissible. And then what are you going to do? You're going to cull dogs and cats? I don't think so. That would go over really big with the American public. So, yeah, really, all bets are off. We are still completely unprepared for how this could impact companion animals. And we need to take the blinders off and really jump to the forefront and take a lead in this area. Okay? I'll take any questions that you may have.
Our next speaker of the night is Dr. Lindsay Starkey, and I said to her, beyond being a parasitologist and assistant professor at the Auburn's College of Veterinary Medicine, what? Oh, the War Eagles travel, I tell you. I said, aside from being a War Eagle, is there anything else you'd like me to say in your bio? And she said, well, you can just make something up. And I thought, this is great. I've always wanted to do this. So Dr. Starkey was born in Britain. She and her fiance boarded a vessel. It was an incredible once-in-a-lifetime journey aboard a seafaring vessel. And on the way, she fell in love with someone else, a young man, but he was another class. And their love was forbidden. And somewhere around Iceland, they struck an iceberg. The boat went down. Her newfound love drowned because she wouldn't make room for him on the wooden door that was floating that she was on. She was rescued and brought to the United States, to Alabama, where she became a faculty member, married her husband, and now wonders every day, what might have been? Give it up for Dr. Lindsay Starkey.
That wasn't embellished a bit. That's really how it happened. No, strangely enough, so the story he made up earlier was something about how I grew up on the streets of Detroit and just realized that I was just going to have to box my way out of it. And I said, do you know my husband actually was a boxer? And so he has this weird intuition. So my husband actually gets very seasick too. So we don't go on boats, right? I learned that the hard way on a 10-day cruise. That my husband does not do boats very well. So I'm glad y'all came out tonight and stuck around. Is everyone full? Yeah. All right. If you need more, it's still back there. You are not going to bother me to get up and refill your plates. You do you. I've been told I have to stand here. I'm normally a wanderer. I wander around CE halls and the lecture hall, and so I'm going to try for the camera to stay still. But I'm definitely going to pace back and forth up here, so I hope that doesn't bother you. And I do want to ask some questions of you guys as we go through this. So someone please be brave and give me an answer from the audience or two. Sound fair? Alrighty, so getting started for this, I want to give my disclosures that I've worked with several animal health companies and societies over the past decade or so. So even though Steve is sponsoring this, I just want you guys to know where I'm coming from because I'm going to share some data tonight. And some of that data was generated in this very specific part of the room tonight. So I'm actually quite intimidated standing up here in front of the heartworm legends that are in the room with us tonight, presenting data on heartworm. I'm like, what can I possibly say in the presence of some of this greatness? But I hope that y'all can get some take-home points to take back to your practices or your institutions, because I know we've got some people from academia here tonight, right? It's just Tim. Tim's just proud of it. Everyone else is just beaten down. Canada, right? We've got veterinary students up front here, I think I heard. So thank you guys for coming out tonight. LMU, right? I'm just a bad eavesdropper. Sorry. So I'm happy y'all are here. So I want to start with my objectives for you guys, and starting off with a couple of personal objectives of mine. I don't know if you can read the little picture there at the bottom, but I had my 23andMe done sometime last year for funsies, and one of the traits they tell you about is your likelihood of being bit by mosquitoes. I didn't need to pay over $100 to find that out. I already knew that I'm a mosquito magnet, and so I hate them with a passion. Like Dr. McNamara said, she loathes Aedes albopictus. I'm there. If you're a mosquito, this is your public warning, right? If you're watching this webinar, if you come into my vicinity and I have any power to do so, I will kill you. That's just it, right? Mosquitoes beware. That's the warning. Because I am a magnet and I don't tolerate them. And if you can see that picture on the right there, that's Dr. McCall's paper that I was reading as I was preparing and putting this talk together. And it was the first nice day evening in Alabama. So this was a few weeks ago. We finally got cool enough to be tolerable outside. So I'm sitting outside, I'm reading this paper, it's dusk, I know better, and a mosquito lands on my shirt. So I smack it, it falls down on the paper, and I'm like, well, this is perfect. I'm just gonna take a picture of this mosquito paper with a dead mosquito on it because it's so important and they are such a problem and they're just getting worse. So I wanna briefly review the heartworm life cycle with you guys. I'm preaching to the converted, right? We're all here because we're heartworm nerds, as Dr. Rem got us to all admit. So review that briefly, but talk about updates in mosquitoes and heartworm and where we stand and where we're going. But ultimately, what can we do to maybe curb this trend that we're seeing? Because unfortunately, the trend that we're seeing isn't a great one. So we've got to do something, and we've got to get better about it. So some hot topics that we've heard about: resistance versus compliance, right? When you see a positive dog, well, did the drugs work? Did they do their job? Or was, the drug situation in the client's hands maybe not going the way it should have? Maybe we had a compliance or adherence failure, right? Resistance is out there, and we'll talk about it, but compliance is a huge problem too, and we have to deal with that. This is, unfortunately, for my sake, I love heartworm diagnostics. I'm a diagnostician as part of my job at Auburn, but we're going to talk about mosquitoes tonight. But if anyone has burning diagnostic questions, it's a huge deal, right? We're learning more about it. We're learning more about how our diagnostics can let us down in certain situations too, right? And we're all faced with these challenging cases where the tests don't make sense to us. I actually just got an email at midnight last night from one of the ECC clinicians at Auburn about this dog that she thinks has heartworm and is testing negative. So I responded at 6 in the morning while I was on the way to airport this morning, and I just got her reply back. So we're doing this weird email correspondence over the weekend because I'm gone. But these things happen. So if anyone wants to talk about those, I'm more than happy to do that later. Heartworm is zoonotic. Dr. Rem, is heartworm zoonotic?
It certainly is.
I heard him tell this. I didn't think you had x-rays, right? I heard him tell the story at Auburn earlier this spring. Heartworm Society president has human heartworm. Well, you live in Mobile, right? Yeah, I'm going to have human heartworm someday too. And we get it the same way the dogs and cats do, right? A mosquito bite. So we do have to think about public health when we're thinking about what we often think is just a canine-specific infection and disease, impacts a broader host range than we think about. And then ultimately our updates on prevention strategies. We need to update what so many of us are doing because we're just not doing quite a good enough job, and we have opportunities to do better. So our favorite, right? And I was just notified recently, I'm going to zoom in on this for you guys. Someone told me the cat looked evil. And I'm like, never once had that crossed my mind, and now none of y'all are going to be able to unsee it, right? And I think it's because the cat has eyes, because the dog doesn't, right? I think that's the only distinction, is that's why the cat looks evil. But y'all know this life cycle, right? You could tell it to me. So my first question to y'all, what do you think is the single most important aspect of the heartworm life cycle? Shout them out. You just got to pick one.
Don't let L3 progress.
Huh?
Don't let L3 progress.
Okay, so let's cut it off before L3. Anyone else?
Don't let them bite.
Don't let them bite. Anything else? What about the worms in the heart? Those are problematic, right? I mean, there's so many key points to this life cycle, right? It's hard to just think of one. That's why the Chris's were the only two that piped up, right? It's hard to just pick one, truly, but you both hit it from two different angles, right? One of the very important key points to this life cycle that we as a veterinary profession have chosen to ignore, because macrocyclic lactones are great, and I'll just kill it after it's been acquired, and I don't have to worry about it. Can we say that anymore? And we don't really know for how long. We probably shouldn't have been saying that, but we need to focus on the mosquito, because focusing at this point in the life cycle, because that's where heartworm prevention works. Most of them aren't preventions at all. They're not preventing infection at all. And when I think of prevention, I think prevent infection, right? No, it's prevent maturation to the point of disease causing. Well, okay. Your clients, what do they think when they think heartworm prevention? I'm proactively killing, right? My dog and cat, they're not going to get it. And that's not what it is. It's retroactively killing what's been acquired for the most case, right? We'll talk about some that are a little different, but we target it there, but we really need to think about the mosquitoes. So there's going to be a quiz at the end of this slide. So I'm going to need you all to review this table, which isn't even comprehensive, in the next 10 seconds so that you can answer my quiz question, right? So my question is, do you live in an area where there's a heartworm competent vector? Yeah. You're in Mobile, right? Or, well, Vegas. Oh, so even more important, right? A lot of the people in and around your area may be thinking, nah, too dry, right? Too hot, too dry. Oh, you're breeding them? That's, okay, you're breeding mosquitoes. Okay.
It's a practice building.
It's a practice built job security. They're everywhere. And as Dr. McNamara introduced to us, there's over 70 competent species that have been proven in the lab, and over 20 of them have been well described in the field. For someone to say, I live in an area where there is not an appropriate mosquito to transmit heartworm, even if a positive dog showed up, that's really just a falsity now. As climate change continues, those mosquitoes are going to continue to expand their ranges. We cannot say it can't happen to me anymore. And I live in Alabama. It happens to me every day, right? Like, it's a personal vendetta of mine to take out all the fire ants and mosquitoes in my yard. Who here lives with fire ants besides? Horrible. My husband's family was just visiting from Argentina for the past couple of weeks. They don't know what fire ants are. And they found out real fast when they went walking through the horse pasture. Because we don't treat the horse pasture, but we treat our yard for them, right? And they were miserable, and we went and bought a bunch of Benadryl. So there's a lot of mosquitoes out there. We have got to be prepared to combat these mosquitoes. So importation issues are constantly facing us. I just learned how Haemaphysalis longicornis probably made it into the United States, right? Whose armpits smuggled those ticks in from Asia, right? Armpits, right? Full disclosure, I know this is being recorded, but I took mosquitoes on a plane once intentionally. Got it right through TSA, no questions asked. They were in a triple barrier, right? It's not hard for these things to move around. And if someone with intention really wanted to do something, I think we were all scared to death about 30 minutes ago, right? You're terrified, yeah. So these things move around, and I loathe the day that infected tire with Aedes albopictus came in to a port in the United States, because that's the most common mosquito I kill on myself. But these things are imported. So I didn't know this was a thing, but disinsection is a word. Sounds like disinfection, right? And that's essentially what it is. It's treating cargo ships and airplanes with insecticides to kill what may have inadvertently hitched a ride as they're coming into some of the ports of call here in the U.S. That's a big deal, and that's a World Health Organization thing, right? Like, this is a huge deal. We need to curb this transport so that we have fewer introductions, but it's going to be really hard to stop them all. And then, as I said, so Haemaphysalis, they're coming in. Migrating birds are bringing ticks and all sorts of other things into this country. So it's not just mosquitoes. Anything has a gateway, potentially, and they're going to exploit that, and we need to be prepared to fight it. So heartworm spreading. You would think, 2019, how long have heartworm preventives been on the market? Yeah, I mean, if you're going way back to DEC time, that predates me as a human being. But the problem's getting worse. All the data points to we're seeing more positive dogs in more locations than we have in the past several years. If you're in Mississippi or Florida, so look at that graphic there in the lower right, you're doing a good job. But that's it. Everyone else in the South, you're red, which means you are seeing more positive cases over time. And I see that map at the lower left there, the one with the blue and gray. And I say to myself as like a dog owner and a dog lover, I'm like, I am so glad all of these dogs from the South that cannot find homes can go find homes in Tim's backyard, in Roger's backyard, right? Ship them up to Canada. Ship them anywhere they can find a home. I'm going to sign their health certificate. Don't worry about it. Building a wall. They're going to fly over it. Fly over it. But I'm so happy that these dogs can find homes. But then as someone who studies vector-borne diseases, I see heartworm and hepatozoan and ehrlichiosis showing up in places that aren't used to dealing with these infections. I consult with vets in the north all the time about heartworm and hepatozoan because it's foreign to them and it's foreign for the time being, but that's changing so quickly. If it's foreign for them now, it won't be next year, right? And for most of them, they've just been missing it. They've not realized that it's theirs. It's as bad as it's becoming. So all the data says it's getting worse, even in the face of what seems like good tools. Better diagnostics, better prevention strategies, right? But we're seeing more positive dogs, so make sense of that. So a little bit more about the vector. We'd like to think, oh, it's not mosquito season, right? When is mosquito season in Mobile? Yeah, yesterday, today, tomorrow, and forever, right? Same thing in Auburn. Like I moved from Kansas originally, where we actually did have ice and snow and like wind. And now that I look back retrospectively, that was a terrible life. And I'm very glad that I no longer live in a state that actually experiences winter. I could never survive in Canada, never. So Auburn's real nice. Like it gets to freezing. That's like the coldest we really get on average, which is amazing, right? And Tim's laughing. He's like, that's summer. Oh, 32 is 0 for my, Canadians in the room. Let's just translate. But when is mosquito season? You can't predict it. You should not be trying to use a calendar to say, well, if I pay attention to mosquitoes and I use my heartworm prevention March through October, I'm good because the mosquitoes are gone November, December, January, February. What about that rogue day when it actually gets up to 60? Mosquitoes don't freeze to death and just disappear, right? How would they come back every year if that's what they did? Right? You can get mosquito activity, tick activity in the winter. And Tom Nelson showed a very graphic image at the last Heartworm Society meeting, for those of you who were there. Remember that winter picture where he was showing this greenway? It was dead. It was like dead grass between these two buildings. And there was one little area of green in between these two houses. And it's where the dryer vent was spilling out into this area. So in the dead of winter, when all the other grass around it is dead and crusty, you've got this warm, moist air on a continuous basis feeding into this microenvironment that the mosquitoes are gonna swarm to. We can't say that the calendar can predict activity. These arthropods don't read. They don't know what a calendar is, right? They're just like, it's a good day, let's go. That's what they do, right? And they're like, it's a bad day, I'm gonna go hide somewhere. Fine. We can't use that calendar. And for your clients that are using, say, monthly preventives, they're going to give it on the 1st, right? And they're going to give it during the appropriate season. But what if they get that rogue prediction of next week it's going to be unusually warm in December? Well, it's not the 1st, so I can't give my prevention now. So I'm just going to wait, and if it's still this warm, maybe on the next 1st, maybe I'll give it then. It's not how it works. It's called prevention for a reason, right? You got to use it prophylactically, not reactively. And the group there at Ledesma Harrington, they did a really neat study. So y'all have been educated on heartworm development units, right? You got to have so many hours over a certain degree, and that's how long it takes for this magical maturation from the microfilaria to the L3 inside the mosquito. Well, that's using average daily temperature. What about all those little fluctuations throughout? So they actually broke it down into the 24 hours a day and did the averages from those hours. And what they realized, their overarching conclusion was that we're grossly underestimating the seasonality of heartworm if we just do it on an HDU unit as a daily kind of thing. But when you look at it on an hourly basis, you're going to pick up an elongated transmission season, if you will. So they did this study in Ithaca. So what you guys can see here, that blue line is doing it by the hour. And that red line is doing it by the traditional heartworm development units. And notice the blue line is to the left of the red earlier in the calendar and to the right of the red later in the calendar. That transmission season was longer than originally predicted. We've got to do better things to refine our ways that we try to predict this, but ultimately it's just unpredictable. That's why year-round heartworm prevention is recommended. Year-round arthropod prevention is recommended. You can't use the calendar to predict these things. So another group, they said, let's go see how many bites a dog gets, right? I don't want to be that dog. 80 mosquito bites in the period of a night in this study. But look at that human statistic that's next. So this study was actually done in the 80s in Alaska, and I don't know that you could actually get approval to do this sort of study now, because you couldn't have paid me enough to sign up for this. But what they did was they did this up at an Air Force base in Alaska. In Alaska, if anyone's been to Alaska, the mosquitoes are insane up there, for longer than you think too, right? Because they've got a lot of coastal, so they've got a lot of fluctuation there. So they signed up for this study, and the study was, let's see if something like DEET or permethrin impregnated gear will protect you from mosquito bites. By God, if I was doing that study, I hope I'm in a treatment group, right? But you have to do a control group. So the controls had over 1,000 bites in an hour. Miserable. So with a risk like that, why do you want to play around with it, right? These things, they are meant to feed and mate and then ultimately die. That is the life goal of a blood-sucking arthropod. And they do a really good job at it. And they don't fly that far from home, most of these mosquito species. So to drive that point home, Tanya McKay's group went to a kennel in Arkansas. And what they found was that the mosquitoes collected inside that kennel that was housing a reservoir dog, on average, about 70% of those mosquitoes were infected with heartworm at every collection, right? That's not good. 7 out of 10 mosquitoes had fed on that positive dog. That's what that means in this very local environment. So now what's the risk to any dog living within a couple mile radius of that dog? How many of y'all live in subdivisions? Do you know the heartworm status of your neighbor? You yeah, I'm their veterinarian, right? Like I know. No. We don't know what's going on in our immediate vicinity. We don't really know what our risk may be. Maybe it's lower than the risk of others. My parents live on a farm. They have never used heartworm prevention like they're supposed to in their dogs, even though I give it to them for free. They won't use it. And they're on 160 acres with no other humans anywhere around. They only have the one dog. But there are some coyotes, and coyotes can be a natural reservoir for this. And I'm actually kind of shocked that their dogs have never actually come up positive for heartworm. But low risk maybe, right? Very few dogs in and around the area. You got to have that reservoir too. And because my dad's a hermit and chooses to live around no one and nothing, right, except deer aren't a reservoir. So maybe that's what's helping them. But you can't ever know what's really going on in your vicinity. So you've got to target these vectors. And what we know is that resistance is inevitable. The genetics for resistance to a drug that hasn't been developed yet exist in an organism somewhere out there. And the development of this hypothetical drug and the use of this hypothetical drug will lead to the development and the amplification of those resistant genes within a population. I mean, that's how drug resistance works in most cases. So it's there. And we're seeing resistance not only in the heartworms themselves, in the vectors too, but using these two approaches in tandem, that's going to be best medicine for our patients. That's what we can do. Because heartworm's surviving, right, Tim? Yeah. I mean, the system we had is not perfect anymore. Oh, right. Right. It probably was never perfect. We just got lucky in some pivotal studies, right? And 2 studies of 8 dogs. We bred for resistant genes, ultimately. Maybe they mutated, right? Adapt or die. That's what these things do. Heartworm resistance is there. And some people still deny it to this day. And that's the head in the sand picture that Dr. McNamara showed. We can't be that when it comes to heartworm resistance, but by and large, that's not why most dogs are showing up positive. It's not because, by and large, the drugs are being used accurately and failing. It's something else. So our prevention tactics have been, classically, for the past 3 decades, let's have the client give something religiously that will retroactively kill whatever's been acquired. That's what we've been, that's our mantra. That's what we've been saying for a long, long time. And then in the early 2000s, moxidectin came out as a molecule, right? Moxidectin acts a little different. That's great. Moxidectin can reach steady state or be put in an injectable form. Moxidectin can actually work proactively. Can actually prevent. And it's still not preventing the infection, but it's killing it that day, at least, right? Because it can be on board long term compared to some of these others. And with the injection, we gave some of the control to the veterinarian, right? So we shifted this a little. We provided some more opportunities there. No longer can it just be the client. We have some options for the vet. Not only can it be just backwards killing 30 days after that mosquito bite, right? We can now have maybe some killing on day of mosquito bite. That's the most recent advance we have had in macrocyclic lactones 18 years ago. Yeah, but you know what? Let's just keep doing it, right? Because it's not that broke, but it's broken, isn't it? So what we need to do is do different things. So this is a text message that I received last week on my way down to Florida from one of my veterinary students. And I did ask her if I could share this anonymously, and she said, yes, please help someone else learn from my mistakes. So her dog actually tested positive for Ehrlichia a long time ago. It's not clinical or anything like that. And so I asked her if we could have some of that blood for teaching purposes so that we could teach a tick-borne lab in the spring. She said, sure, I'll get you some blood. So she brought me some blood from her dog. And so this is where this question starts. Hey, do you still have my dog's blood from camp this summer? Yeah, plasma somewhere. Why? Well, I'm having a freak out. I was dumb and used such and such repellent product, and I thought they repelled mosquitoes. I said, well, it kind of does repel mosquitoes, but were you not using heartworm prevention too? Correct. Yeah, so she admits, I don't even know what's been going on in my head. And I said, it's all right, right? We're going to get through this. We're going to talk about testing your dog now, testing your dog in 6 months, putting your dog on a heartworm prevention product, right? Like, there's steps forward, and maybe your dog's going to be okay. Maybe your dog won't have acquired heartworm in the past year when you've only been using a repellent, but y'all know we can't just use a repellent, right? It's always this double approach, this integrated strategy. Because if we can prevent all the bites, that would be amazing. But we know there's going to be some gaps here and there. We know that's going to happen. So she calmed down, right? But how many of y'all have had this very client in your practice? We all have, right? They were confused. They thought what they were buying and giving did so much more than maybe what it's actually capable of doing. There's almost too much out there for them to choose from, right? And sometimes we just let them choose. Yeah, you want to go OTC or go on Chewy or whatever, right? I've heard at the pet store, yeah, buy the Capstar. It's a good month-long flea control product. They'll figure that one out pretty quick, right? But there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of miscommunication. And there's just a lot of, I know what she was taught. She's second year. She learned about heartworm last fall from Dr. Blackburn. I know what she was taught. It was not, yes, just use a repellent and your dog will be fine. This is an educated person still being confused. So imagine our clientele, our general population, the struggles that they're probably dealing with. So SIVA paired up and they found out that over a quarter of pet owners thought they were giving something that would control heartworm that was only flea and or tick. No heartworm spectrum anywhere in that product. Yeah, she was one of the 27, right? And then they also found that only a quarter of dogs in this study, their owners admitted to compliant heartworm prevention use, which equated over 8 months a year. To me, 8 months a year is not compliant in Alabama, right? It's not compliant in Louisiana. It's pushing compliance in Kentucky, right? He says no, right? No, it's year-round. We've got to be doing year-round. So they went on and they said, all right, let's look at Florida. Like this different group wanted to look at Florida, and they surveyed owners there. 60% of people didn't even know mosquitoes were involved in heartworm transmission. We're not doing our job of educating. How many heartworm conversations do you guys have in your practice every day? I mean, it should be the same number as the number of appointments you have, pretty much, right? Heartworm nerds. All right, so this is a biased population. You're telling me my survey is flawed? Yeah. But how many of you have ever come out of a room where you've just heard, no, I can't, money, no, and then gone into that next room and carried that previous room with you and just gave this, yeah, we can talk about heartworm today if you want. Dr. Rim says no. He's as enthusiastic as this trombone player down here when it comes to heart. Did y'all see that the guy playing the cymbal was playing it with a screwdriver? You weren't close enough. He had a screwdriver, just banging that thing. It was awesome. But a lot of us suffer from that apathy, right? We think, oh, we talk day in and day out about heartworm, and our clients really know about this, and I don't want to bombard them again this year by telling them the same thing that they already know. They don't know. They forget. They have a lot of things on their plate. We have got to be enthusiastic about it and have the most frequent and frank conversations we have about these risks that are posed to their pets and ultimately their family. Because veterinarians are public health officials too. Mosquito-borne pathogens are public health threats. We have got to talk to them about this. So back to this. Where else can we do something about this life cycle? Right? You can target the mosquitoes in a couple different places. You can have that reservoir dog, and maybe this is a dog undergoing treatment but is still microfilariamic for a little while, right? Put them on something that will keep mosquitoes from biting them so that they're not a reservoir while we're dealing with their heartworm infection, right? Or put them on something that'll kill the mosquito right after it bites. As long as that mosquito can't mature, that heartworm is not going to mature, right? Something that's going to kill mosquitoes there, but something that's going to prevent mosquitoes from biting the naive dog or the naive cat. I should have made it a smaller X, right? Because we don't have as many options for the cats, but there's a few out there that might help prevent some bites too. and they need heartworm protection as well. So we have a lot of other targets that we are not taking advantage of. So some of you have met this is Kevin, this is my dog. And these pictures were taken by my dog sitter because she takes amazing dog pictures and sends them to me when we're like away. So we have a couple of places we need to work on this, right? So at the dog level, yeah, year-round heartworm prevention, right? We're not going to stop doing that. But we've got to consider year-round vector repellency too. And that's going to help with fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, right? We're going to kind of get some broad spectrum coverage here too if we can choose a product that's going to really repel a lot of these things. That's 2 ways just to protect Kevin right there. That's me focusing on Kevin. Don't forget the environment. Can't we do stuff there too? So can you all see this little picture here? It's kind of hard with the lighting in the room. So as soon as I pulled up this slide, because I wanted to show my husband, I was like, look at the cute Kevin pictures. He immediately focuses in on this guy. And he's like, is that a picture of me? And I'm like, no, because I have never taken a picture of you spraying our yard. But that's what we do. We now have a pickup truck with one of those like 300-gallon water tanks in the back of the pickup truck, and he just drives around the yard spraying now. He doesn't have to walk it. We take fire ants and mosquitoes seriously at my house, right? But there's all these other strategies too that you don't think of. Changing the bird baths, getting rid of any sort of container that would hold water, treating water sources, right? Our new place has a little pond down in front. It's nice and pretty, but it's gross, and I am really going to fight with my HOA person about treating that thing. Because that's just, right? It's like your swimming pool. It's a mosquito breeding ground. We've got to target the environment too, and not only that, avoidance strategies. That's my watch saying mosquito time, right? There are certain times during the day at certain times of the year where mosquitoes are going to be more active. I should not have been sitting out on my back porch at dusk reading a paper. I should have been inside on the other side of the screens, and then that mosquito wouldn't have got to me. But it was nice, right? I wanted to be outside. I did at least have long sleeves and long pants on, but I didn't have any repellent on because I was just going to be out there for 30 minutes. Well, mosquito found me, right? How many of y'all watched some of the promo videos for this? No one. One. Okay. So y'all saw my video, right? So we were outside for over an hour filming those little like 30-second shots. How many mosquito bites did I acquire while we were filming at dusk at my house? Yeah. I was really regretting that So yeah, do as I say, not as I do. But target that environment. We have additional strategies. We have avoidance strategies. We have pet strategies, and we've got to use this integrated approach. So I want to show you guys a couple of studies. So this was done at Auburn shortly before I got there. And so we raise mosquitoes for a living in an old walk-in cooler, right? We have converted it to an insectary, so it's this really musty, humid little room I hate walking into now. But we raise mosquitoes at Auburn, and what they showed with this study was if you feed mosquitoes through a membrane, which is normally how we do it, so that's some sheep intestine right there, and you're going to stretch it across this glass vial, and you're going to put blood in it. That's how we infect our mosquitoes in the lab and feed them, because the other option is to feed them on yourself, and that's, 1, not legal anymore, and 2, not fun for the person doing it. Is it legal in Canada? No. Okay. Totally not worth $5, even with the inflation that would be today, right? So we artificially feed mosquitoes now through these membranes, and the way this study was set up was we're going to have some mosquitoes feeding on a non-treated membrane and some mosquitoes attempting to feed on a treated membrane, and the membrane was treated with a repellent product. It was Vector in this study, Vector 3D. And so that's why there's 2 mosquito cages there side by side, and there was actually a barrier between them because we wanted to reduce the ability for the volatility of that product to cross over and impact the other cage. So that's how this was set up. And then they put little GoPro cameras in the bottom of the mosquito cages. So here's that view from the bottom up on that blood membrane. And on the left there are the mosquitoes in the cage with no product whatsoever. And on the right are the mosquitoes in the treated cage. How are those mosquitoes doing? They are hungry, right? When you carry those cages, you got to be careful that you touch them on the like solid edges, because if you hold them next to the screen, you'll have mosquito bites on your hands. The ones on the left, they look pretty good, right? Swarming that membrane, probably 20, 30 mosquitoes feeding on it right now. The one on the right, they're not hungry enough apparently. They're not hungry enough to try to get through that, right? They don't want to go there. That's anti-feeding. This is repelling them from even trying to bite and feed. Is that not a graphic video? Dr. Blackburn shared this with me to share with you guys tonight. So furthermore, Dr. McCall did a lot of work there at TRS. Said, I want to take this further. I want to do more than just mosquito stuff, right? So you did some mosquito characterization. You said, let's actually quantify the anti-feeding and the knockdown effect that we're experiencing in these animals treated with Vector 3D, right? Versus a control, untreated control. So what they found was that over 95% of the mosquitoes were prohibited from feeding throughout the month as the month went on in this study, right? It started at 100, it waned a little, but greater than 95% of the bites even being prevented. It's awesome. And then of those mosquitoes that were exposed to those treated dogs, if they had fed, they were dead in 3 days. Well, heartworm life cycle, broken. 2 different places right there. That's your proof. And of those that didn't have evidence of feeding, right, because they examined the abdomens of these mosquitoes to look at them and say, oh, it looks like there's blood in there, right? So if they were deemed to be non-fed initially, they were actually allowed to try to live on if they could. And of the 2 surviving mosquitoes in that study, neither one had L3s, which means they actually didn't feed, right? They never acquired microfilaria historically, and so now they don't have L3s when we dissect them later. 100% anti-feeding, down to 96. That's awesome. No L3 development in the mosquitoes exposed to this microfilariamic blood. Awesome. What about the dog? What about resistance? How are we going to fare here, right? Is this going to help us with the current place we're at, which is continuing to recover resistant isolates, macrocyclic lactone resistant isolates of heartworm in nature? So what they did with this study is they used a heartworm prevention product. It was milbomycin based. They used Vector 3D, a repellent product against mosquitoes. They used them in combination in one group, and then they had their control group, right? And what did they find? They found that, again, the anti-feeding that the Vector groups had was in the high 90s. We're preventing most of these bites from even happening. We're knocking down the mosquitoes really quickly. We're killing them quickly. But even further, so at the end of this study, you necropsy the dogs, right? So you have to see how many worms are there. That's how you do heartworm studies. To know if it worked, you got to go see if there are worms present. And so what they found at the end of this was, in the control dogs, they had worms, right? In the dogs that only got oral heartworm prevention, classical approach to how we prevent heartworm in this country, 17 worms. It was a resistant isolate that they used, right? So we knew it would fail, but that's failing pretty bad. But in the group that had both heartworm prevention and Vectra, 0 worms. You reduce the bites to the point where you give the macrocyclic lactone the better chance of fighting what gets in, right? If there's not even that much getting in, it doesn't even have a job to do, right? It's just a backup plan. Maybe that's what it should be. Maybe it should be our backup plan, right? Let's prevent the bite on the front end. So ultimately, heartworm's complex. We all know that. It seems like the more we find out, the more complex we realize it is. But we have strategies and we have tools. We just have to learn how to communicate them. We've got to communicate them to the veterinary profession. We've got to communicate that to the clients. And then we've got to make sure it gets through, because it is confusing. And we've got to fix that compliance issue. It's hard. It's real hard. I was a day late last month on my heartworm preventions. I know that's not a big deal. But what if it was more than that, right? And it often is. So these integrated strategies are really going to help us. And I love that the Heartworm Society guidelines have embraced this in the guideline. What's shaded there in purple? We have got to start targeting that mosquito. We've got to start preventing as many bites as we can. We're going to save dogs' lives. We're going to protect human health. We're going to protect the population health of dogs. It's not just that dog, right? It's all the dogs nearby we're going to be protecting. But do environmental control as well and practice avoidance strategies too. So I'd like to thank Siva for bringing this together tonight and y'all for coming out. All the veterinarians in practice, you guys are on the ground, right? You're the boots on the ground with this. This is your task. This is your charge. All the researchers out there couldn't have done this without y'all, right? Those preliminary pioneer people that brought up the R word to begin with. I can't imagine how scary that would have been, right? Industry partners and both doctors work in McNamara. This was a great event. You all were a great audience, and I will open it up to any questions that you may have.